In a Royal Navy ship's logbook from 1757, the crew records a lunar eclipse, and just hours later, a punishment that's never explained. While the major battles of the 7 Years' War are well studied, this channel focuses on the smaller, overlooked details, the everyday entries in naval and regimental records that show what life was actually like. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for stopping on by today. I truly appreciate you opting to spend a few minutes of your time with me today. My name is Jeff. I've been studying the 78th Regiment and the 7 Years' War for about 27 years now. Center screen, we're looking at Ireland, and you'll see a label there of 30 June 1757. If you're on your mobile device, I should add, I apologize that some of this text is going to be a little bit small, so hopefully you can follow along. But on 30 June 1757, Colonel Simon Fraser's 2nd Highland Battalion and Colonel Montgomery's 1st Highland Battalion, both those regiments would later be styled as the 77th Highlanders and the 78th Highlanders, they departed under convoy of a Royal Navy man-of-war ship named Enterprise, sometimes spelt with an S, sometimes with a Z, depending on the record that you're looking at. There would be a convoy of 45 ship that would leave that morning, but they all didn't get out that morning. As you'll see, after a couple days, center screen again, the 3rd through the 6th of July, the convoy kind of stalled in a sense because they had to collect all the ships. We have to remember high tides and low tides, getting out of port, and there was also a harbor master that would get the ships on out, help get the ships on out, I should say. So after they collected everybody, they continued off to the southwest for the next week or so. And then on July 12th is when Colonel Montgomery's portion of the convoy would break off from Enterprise, and they would continue sailing to the south as they were headed to South Carolina on the United States East Coast, while Colonel Fraser's part of the convoy with Enterprise continued over to the southwest and made their way towards the Azores. Now let me bring you in a little bit closer and show you what was going on. You can see at the top there on 16 July, they're coming into the Azores operating area. They continue south. You see them on the 18th center screen there. It's not clear in the logbook that I'm about to show you whether they actually stopped here on the 18th, but they continued to the south and to the west. You see on the 19th where they're at just below Pico Island, before heading back east over to St. Michael's Island. Now, between the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st, there was some heavy gales that were recorded in the logbook. So the longitude coordinates are a little obscured because we have to remember recording longitude requires the sun and requires a sextant. So in essence, they were sort of sailing blind is what I'm trying to say. They didn't have the sun for a couple days. They weren't really lost because, they have the way of the islands that they could navigate by. But certainly they were unable to record some coordinates. So they probably got a little bit of R&R around St. Michael's Island. And then on the 21st and on the 22nd, I should say, they started heading off to the southwest again. You see on the 23rd and 24th, 25th, they're starting to leave the area. So let's go back to our larger map. And we'll pick up on the 25th, center screen just below the coordinates there, still heading to the south, 26th and 27th. Then they make a turn heading to the west as they start making their way over to Halifax, Nova Scotia. On the 30th, is where we're going to stop. And you see center screen again, I've actually placed some crosses there to highlight it. Now let's go over to the logbook. So here's a transcription, a facsimile, if you will, of what the logbook looks like. I'll show you briefly. This is the actual logbook. These entries are for August, but you see it can get pretty crowded pretty quickly. Beautiful cursive writing. But it's kind of hard to show you exactly what's going on in this logbook because it is so crowded. So that's why I did the facsimile here for you. This was picked up from the National Maritime Museum in London. I've got the references at the top if you're interested in obtaining a copy yourself. I actually picked up from 15 June to 3 September. Even though the voyage didn't start till 30 June, I like to see a couple weeks in advance where the ship was at, what was going on. Maybe there's some notes that pertain to the voyage that's pending. So we'll look at the last two lines. Let me get in a little bit tighter for you. Looking at the 31st and the 1st, but in all actuality, we're kind of looking at the 30th because that's what I highlighted on the map, and this all kind of ties into each other. Let me explain. On the ship, the day was recorded from 12 noon to 12 noon. Unlike on land, we record our days from midnight to midnight. Ship did it a little bit different, and the reason they did that is because fresh bearings at sea were taken every day at 12 noon. And the reason for that is because that's when the sun was at its highest point. You got to remember they're using a compass, they're using maps, and they're using a sextant. They have to operate off the sun to get their bearings. So that's why the remarks column contains remarks from noon to noon. So what appears on the 31st, let's take a look. We've got the winds, the course direction, how many miles they traveled that previous day. So in that 24-hour period, on this day, they got lucky and they traveled 83 miles. And it shows latitude, longitude, and the distance that they are, in this case, from St. Michael's Island. And then the far right column, DOW, that means ditto weather, or the same weather as the day before, which was moderate and cloudy. So it was just a way to abbreviate. So moderate and cloudy winds at 1 p.m. made the signal for the convoy to make more sail. So the convoy is a little bit slow. At 6 p.m., lost sight of a small brig astern. So the stern is the back side of the ship. So there was a small ship behind them. A brig is just a two-masted ship. At 8 p.m. began an eclipse of Ye Moon. I like how they do that. Ye Moon, which ended 10:30. So there's a lunar eclipse that's going on at sea. How cool is that? Yes, we've all experienced them here on land, but when you think about an eclipse at sea, it's special really because it was impossible to miss. It was slow, and it was a shared event against a relatively clear horizon when you think about it. Not like when we're on land here, we've got buildings, we have light pollution, depending on where the eclipse is occurring, which can obscure all that. So it really broke up a shipboard routine of monotony. That's the easiest way to say it. I did 20 years in the United States Navy, and I have about 5.5 years of sailing time, sailing around the world. And shipboard life can be pretty monotonous. So when you get a special event like this, it's really something special and something that stays with you for a lifetime. So they've got the eclipse, which is going on that night. And then the next morning at 8 a.m., they made the signal for ye headmost ships to shorten sail. So some ships are getting out a little bit too far ahead. So the signal, now when I say the signal, the main ship Enterprise would have hoisted up on her masts some flags colored flags. They may have lines on them or circles. They may be red and blue, blue and white, green and yellow, whatever they are. And they would hoist it up to the top of the mast so the other ships could see. And each flag represented a certain set of instructions. So in this case, they made the signal for the headmost ships to shorten, and they fired a shot at one of the ships for not obeying it. At this point, they have 20 sail in company. Fired a shot. If you think about today, that's a euphemism that we're familiar with. A shot across the bow. I think everybody's probably heard that. So Enterprise fired a shot at one of those ships for not obeying the signal to slow down. On the next day, nothing really particularly different. We're on the bottom row now. The same things are recorded, the winds, the course direction, and so forth. They traveled 35 miles in the last 24-hour period. They're a little bit farther, 168 leagues now from St. Michael's. Again, DOW, the same weather. At 8 p.m., read the Articles of War to the ship's company and punished a Marine, his name was Stephen Phillips, for sleeping on his post. However, the method was not recorded in the captain's logbook. It tells me a couple things. First of all, this was probably a small Marine detachment of maybe 10, maybe 15 people. And the reason why they were, I should say the most likely reason why they were brought aboard is because I told you that I normally gather about 2 weeks of data beforehand. And I found a note leading up to departure that Enterprise would also be escorting payroll for British troops that were in Boston. So after they dropped off Colonel Fraser in Halifax, the ship would continue on to Boston and drop off the payroll. So more than likely, that's what the Marine detachment was brought on board for, to protect the payroll funds, in essence. Protect that war chest, if you will. So he gets punished for sleeping on his post. Well, what's the likely punishment? For a first offense, for something like this, it could have been something as minor as maybe he lost some food rations for a day or two. Maybe he lost his drinking rations, his grog, if you will. It could have even been some punishment included a fresh bucket of seawater being poured on top of your head while the rest of the crew watched. And it was just a way of shaming them. That was for a first offense. And then, of course, a second offense and a third offense, things would escalate. There are some recordings on a couple other days on this voyage where one gentleman, I remember, I'll have to refresh myself, but that he was actually flogged. I don't remember the exact punishment, but I just wanted to share with you, these are some of the types of things that you're going to experience when you get into the ship's logbooks and really see what was going on. Life at sea, if you will. So I hope you enjoyed this content. I'd like to thank you again for stopping on by. And if you're new here and you want to subscribe, I would welcome the opportunity to show some more of my material and share it with you. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time.